Greetings, and welcome back to your chosen podcast, The Africanist. I am your host, Bambanjai, and today I'm back with another episode with a special guest to talk about some of the recent events happening on the African continent. So today, my guest is Natàlia Bueno, and Natàlia Bueno and I will talk about the recent political upheaval in Mozambique. So as you may know, in October, Mozambique had a presidential election that turned out to be very controversial. The ruling party, Frelimo, was declared victor, but the opposition still continues to contest the victory. That situation has led to a lot of deadly protests, and dozens of people have been killed or incarcerated. So to talk about that today, my guest is Dr. Natàlia Bueno. Natàlia Bueno is a researcher at the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra, Portugal. She is currently working on a project entitled Reintegra, reviewing the impact of amnesty in the reintegration of ex-combatants, a bottom-up view of the case of Mozambique, funded by the Portuguese Foundation for Science and Technology. Natàlia previously worked as an assistant professor at the Faculty of Economics at the University of Coimbra and at Louisiana University in Porto. She was also a postdoctoral researcher in the CROM program, meaning Cross-Memory Politics of Silence, the Colonial Liberation of War in Post-Colonial Times at CES, and also as a country expert in the Global Leadership Project at the University of Texas, Austin. Natàlia holds a PhD in international politics and conflict resolution from the University of Coimbra. Natàlia, welcome to the Africanist podcast.
Thanks so much for the invite. It's a pleasure to participate.
In October, there was a presidential election, and the results of these elections are highly contested. So how have the recent elections in Mozambique impacted the political landscape, and what are the main points of contentions between the ruling party and the opposition?
Well, that's a very important question. And if you allow me, I will answer your question in reverse order, maybe. And to do that, I think that it's important for some of those listening us who maybe are not, so familiar with the Mozambican case, to talk a little bit about the main actors. So if we take Frelimo, right? Frelimo was founded in 1962 as a liberation movement that fought against Portuguese colonialism, and the party that has been in power since independence in 1975. On the other hand, Renamo was founded in 1976 as a guerrilla movement in the former Rhodesia to fight against the repressive measures taken by Frelimo after independence, but which also enjoyed the support of the apartheid regime in South Africa. So for this reason has been portrayed as the author of a war of destabilization by Frelimo, and not as the fighters for democracy as they have characterized themselves. So in that sense, Renamo was also, until yesterday, so to speak, the main opposition in Mozambique. And finally, we have Podemos, a small opposition party that was virtually unknown until these elections. And Podemos supported Venâncio Mondlane, who claimed victory and nominated himself president of Mozambique, right? So with those actors in mind, going to your question, right, the main points of contention between the ruling party and the opposition. So what we have is the National Electoral Commission awarded victory to Daniel Chapo, the candidate of the ruling party Frelimo, with 76.7% of the vote, while Venance Mondlane came second with 20.32% of the votes. So Mondlane and the Podemos party, of course, they do not recognize the results, which, by the way, still have to be validated and proclaimed by the Constitutional Council. And other opposition parties, such as Renamo and MDM, for example, have also refused to recognize the results. And Renamo leader, Ousuf Momad, for example, has called for the elections to be annulled in the name of electoral justice.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's say, turning to the first part, right, of your question in terms of the political landscape. And I would say that the last elections were unprecedented in a number of ways. And I will highlight at least maybe two of them. So first, we have the element of electoral fraud, right? So studies of elections in Mozambique show that there has always been some sort of, of electoral fraud or irregularity in Mozambique. But the difference now is that for almost 20 years, there was an attempt to sell the image of free and fair elections, right? But since 2018, 2019, the fraud has been blatant and obvious. And some people even say that the ruling party even openly supports fraud as a show of power. So it's very complicated, right? So second element, Mondlane has emerged as the second electoral force in the country's history to challenge both Frelimo, right? So the party that have been in power, right, since independence. And on the other hand, Renamo, the main opposition party since the first elections in 1994. So this means that the Podemos party is breaking, right, in an unprecedented way with a democratic dispute based on this historical two-party rivalry between Frelimo and Renamo. And to make this even clear, if we think in terms of numbers, right, comparing to the 2019 election, Frelimo strengthened its numbers with 195 seats in parliament out of 250. Renamo, which had 60, saw its numbers reduced to just 20. And Podemos, a no parliamentary party, won 31 seats. So again, right? So just to finish and in summary, let's say, the result of these elections is the weakness of Renamo as an opposition party, right? Which, of course, has historically shown a thirst for power, and we can talk about that later. On the other side, the fragility of Frelimo, because, the whole election has been tainted, with irregularities. And finally, Podemos, right? Let's say a revelation, breaking this historical two-party rivalry between both parties, main parties in the country.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Now, and you already, I think, responded partly to the next question, which is, I want you to put into a more historical context, like the current political upheaval. You said earlier, Frelimo is the party that basically fought, along with other entities, fought for the independence of Mozambique. It is the party of Samora Machel. How did we come from being the party that achieved independence, the party of Samora Machel, to being, the party that is now contested by these popular protests? So how did we get there from the historical party to now basically a party that is being contested? And how is that affecting governance and democracy?
Yeah, as you said, I think I already said a little bit, right, about the historical rivalry between Frelimo and Renamo and, the whole electoral fraud. But I think another, like a further step back is important, like in order to understand the whole situation. So going back, right, so a little bit more. So, or expanding maybe a little bit more the whole context, right? So shortly after independence, in again, the independence happened in 1975. So Frelimo and Renamo fought a war, right, that lasted almost 16 years, right? And depending on which side you are on, like this war has been called, as I said before, right, a war of destabilization or a war for democracy. And with the term, the 16-year war, like between quotation marks, being considered the more neutral term, let's say. So these different terminologies, they are also related to whether one considers only domestic or international factors or both, right, as explanatory variables of the war. Anyway, regardless, like of its origins, the war meant that the Mozambican population had endured almost 30 years of war, right? Because we have to remember, like the 10 years of colonial war that happened before from 1964 to 1974. So of course, these wars left, like the country in shatters, like a population, like in pain and suffering and enormous potential violence. And not only, like we had nearly 1 million deaths, right, from war-related causes.
Mm-hmm.
But after, and of course, and let's say peace took many years to come, right? So after years of negotiations, the general peace agreement was finally signed in 1992. And hopes for lasting peace and reconciliation, of course, were very high, right? People were very tired of the war. Renamo became a political party. The majority of ex-combatants were demobilized and integrated in Mozambican society, and the whole UN auspicious. And the first general elections were held in 1994. And in this context, Mozambique was quickly, considered by the international community as a success story of peace building and reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
But however, when a closer look reveals, that despite those, and some positive steps towards peace and reconciliation the first years after the peace agreement, thus, these initial developments were virtually reversed under the government of Armando Guebuza until the reemergence of the conflict in 2012, 2013. And new peace agreements were signed in 2014 and 2019. And we could say that these elections were an important test for peace and reconciliation, right? So I talked a lot about this, expand on this analysis on reconciliation in my forthcoming book. But very briefly, I think it's important, and I argue that at the heart of reconciliation is inclusion. And inclusion or exclusion, for that matter, takes different forms. So political, socioeconomic, and military, right? So, and if we focus specifically on political inclusion, we can ask ourselves, right, how can we say that a country has political inclusion or not? And to answer this question, I trace, the access to political representation over the years. So to what extent, former opponents, once completely excluded from the former institutions of power, either, of course, remain excluded or are included, right? So, but again, what this means, right, in practical terms. So we can ask questions like, are elections free and fair? Are the state institutions independent and impartial? Do parties have equal access to state resources? And fortunately, when we look at the case of Mozambique, the answer to all these questions is no. I have already talked about electoral fraud and other irregularities, but there's also the fact that electoral institutions such as the National Electoral Commission and the Constitutional Council are partisan and dominated by Frelimo. Another factor that raises red flags about access to political representation is the dominance of the ruling party and its use of state resources. And when we put all this together, right, so these elements show that access to political representation in Mozambique has deteriorated over the years. So prevent, the participation not only of Frelimo, but also of the other opposition parties, such as MDM and now Podemos, right? So just to close, to end this question, of course, Frelimo has had its shortcomings and weaknesses over the years, but the lack, right, of political inclusion has always been there at various levels. And Montland brings this out, with a special light because it is outside, again, this historical dispute between Frelimo and Frelimo.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Now, as a result of the uprising, two prominent opposition leaders were killed. Who were they? Who were they, and what details emerged about their assassinations?
I would just think in terms of timeline, because I think it will be helpful for us. So just recalling, right? The elections were held on the 9th of October.
Mm-hmm.
And according to the law, the National Electoral Commission has 15 days to announce the results. So that is on the 24th of October. Meanwhile, given the history of electoral fraud and irregularities, a draft of the Podemos party's appeal was being prepared, right, by those opposition leaders, exactly to be presented to the Constitutional Council as soon as the Electoral Commission announced the results. But of course, they were not able to do that, right? So before they could do that, Elvino Diaz and Paulo Guambe were shot dead in the early hours of 19 October, right? So they were prevented of doing their work, right? And so Elvino Diaz was a prominent lawyer and human rights defender. And Paulo Guambe was an official of the Podemos party. And a few days later, in terms of developments, a few days later after that, their death, Montland led a protest at the site of the murders and was tear gassed while giving an interview to national and international media. The video circulated the whole internet, right? So this led to calls for more demonstrations, which have continued ever since. And if we take, today, 9 of December, so almost 6 days have passed since the elections of the Constitutional Council, has yet to validate the results. Meanwhile, the protests, they continue, and the situation is becoming increasingly worrying. We could say that, until the beginning of last week, the protests were characterized by blocking roads and making noise, pots and pans. But now protesters are attacking, Frelimo headquarters and government offices. And to just going back very briefly to the assassinations, like two contradictory narratives emerged regarding the details of the murders. So on the one hand, Montblanc accused, right, the defense and security force of killing Elvino Diaz and Paulo Guambe, saying that the police had tried even, to cover up their involvement by collecting evidence and etc. On the other hand, a spokesman for the Maputo police told a press conference that the victims had been murdered by people with whom they had argued over marital problems.
Over marital problems?
Well, after having been drinking, in this very popular market called Pulmão in one of Maputo's neighborhoods. And according to the police, after the argument, what they did, the individuals, to whom they have fought, followed them, blocked their cars, and shot them.
Wow. And that's the official version of the police, the national police, right?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And what is worrisome, again, it's because when we look back, right, this kind of assassinations, they're not unprecedented, like in Mozambique. So in 2015, for example, there plenty other examples, but I'm just recalling this one that happened in 2015. There was this mysterious death of Professor Gilles Stock. He was a lecturer in constitutional law at Guambe University. And he was murdered in the center of Maputo, as Guambe and Elvino. And shortly after publicly supporting, Renemo's demand in the context of the debate on political decentralization that was happening at the time. So, and again, while those responsible for his death are still unknown, still today, no one knows, some people blame Frelimo and its grip on power. So, but we still don't know.
Interesting. So now you mentioned that we still do not have the official election results yet, right?
Yeah.
So what is the holdup? So what is causing that? Is it because of the protests, or are they pressure exercised on the courts, or what is happening?
Yeah, because the constitutional council, they don't have a limit, by law, they don't have a limit, to pronounce the results. They haven't done yet, because of course the opposition, they have questioned, so they have sent, documents, and they have, made some appeals, and they are still analyzing, all the documents, and they haven't decided yet, despite the whole pressure, yes, and the whole protests and everything.
Now, what role has the international community played in addressing the escalating violence and protests in Mozambique? And also, what more can be done to support a peaceful resolution?
I would say that particularly related to the second part of the question, usually we say, and I'm sure, you do that as well, we can't really do what we call futurology, right? I mean, it's very hard to try to see, right, what's going to happen. But of course, considerations and try to understand what we have on the table. It's very important. So let's try, right? So the national community, right? Or how can we see and understand what's going on? So despite some note, right, about the brutality of the police, representatives of the European Union, for example, they said with all letters that they are not ready to take sides. So according to this declaration, and in fact, let me just quote a small piece. They said, the election of 9th of October, we are witnessing a worrying spread of violence, looting, vandalism, and desperation. The brutality of the repression from the state apparatus and the police has exacerbated the situation. We deplore the considerable number of fatalities over the past weeks, and we also condemn the assassination of the two opposition politicians on 19 October. And we demand clarity on the facts and the full investigation. And then, it continues. The EU and the Electoral Observation Mission are not taking in sides and all act on the basis of principles as an important partner and friend of Mozambique, solely in the interest of the Mozambican people. And end of quote. So given the whole history and given the declaration and the facts that they have always, the history that they have always supported Frelimo, despite the history of electoral fraud and irregularities, I would, in fact, I would not say that it's impossible, for the EU to take a clear position on the electoral fraud and the current repression, by the state apparatus. But I would say that the chances are very slim, let's say that the economic interests, that they have there, are at stake and they're very high, right? So Mozambique has, let's remember, Mozambique has significant reserves of natural resources, particularly gas in the north of the country. And the European states, such as France and Portugal, they're very interested in them, right? In addition to that, you also had at the end of November, governments such as the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Norway, Switzerland. So they all condemned, the escalating violence against the civilians in Mozambique and called for investigations. The UN, in early November and in 15th of November, they all urged, the experts urged the governments to stop human rights violations. But again, I don't want to sound like too pessimistic, but if we draw a parallel, with the past role of the UN and the international community, as in the donor community, I'm not sure we should expect much. When we take back, again, the accord in 1992, right? That it was under, the UN auspices and auspices, sorry, and we compare with other concurrent cases like El Salvador, Rwanda, that the international community pushed, for mechanisms, like judicial mechanisms and truth commissions. In Mozambique, we didn't have anything, there was no, the pressure was not there, right? And even though, since 1992, 1999, in fact, the UN specifically said, that the mediators, they have been instructed not to endorse peace agreements that include blanket amnesty. But again, the Maputo Accord, not even the 2014 Accord and the 2019 Maputo Accord also included blanket amnesties, So again, no judicial provisions or any sort of mechanism, to address past abuses and crimes.
And then what about the African Union and the SADC, the South African Development Community? Have they made any statements or condemnation?
Yeah, they didn't back Frelimo, but also their position, it's very fragile. It's what, it's the opinion of other analysts also say, right, in the country, is in the region. It's let's say it's very fragile at the moment. So it's not that they're able to do much either. So.
Now, how are ordinary Mozambicans affected by the ongoing turmoil? And what are the main concerns and demands?
Well, let's say that of course, they have been affected in many ways, right? So the most immediate effect has, of course, been the police brutality, right? And the disproportionate use of force. The exact figures are not available, but according to NGOs, like who have been keeping track, so we have more than 100 people that have been killed by the police, nearly like 300 people shot, and approximately 3,500 arrested. So the right, so the dimension of the violence is getting like higher and higher, and more worse again. The question that we could ask maybe is, so in such context, right, of such brutality, why do people keep, right, protesting?
Mm.
So when we look, like the general context in Mozambique, so according for example, like to the UNDP, Mozambique has a population of around 35 million people, and a significant proportion of whom are under the age of 35. So it's very young, right? So in concrete terms, this means that around 2/3 of the country population is under the age of 25, and more than half are children. So being so young, it's also important to remember that these people, they do not have memories of the war,
Yeah.
nor do they feel deeply connected to the narrative that Frelimo has reproduced over the years as the sole liberators of the country from Portuguese, right? So they do not really engage anymore. They do not respond the same as the generation that participated of the war.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hmm.
Yeah, and in addition, like I think, like in terms of, I think it's also important to look at the economic aspect, right? So the number of people living below the poverty line, like in Mozambique, has increased like exponentially over the past 10 years, right? To more than half of the population. So the exact numbers that we had like in 2015 were 46%, and now we have more than 65%, right? So it's again, it's a context of like of poverty, of desperation, right? So meanwhile, and the population has watched the so-called hidden debt scandal. It was a huge scandal that happened in Mozambique, in which the political elite took out like approximately $2 billion loan, and of course profit from the bribes, while no services or products benefited the Mozambican people, right? And in fact, contributed to the increase in poverty in the country. So what we see, right, in the daily lives of people, of ordinary people, like they go to hospitals and have, their surgeries postponed because, of the lack of basic materials. They go to public pharmacies and live without the medicine they need. Children go to school and they don't have, classes because their teachers are on strike, and so on. So all these, right, while they see the political elite more, more precisely, let's say the members of Frelimo, getting richer and richer. So let's say that, the elections were the turning point, right? When they saw Frelimo's ability to commit a massive electoral fraud that is taking, like political control of the elections in the same way that, in fact, they have taken control of the economy, of the state institutions. So, like we could say that the protests, like they expanded, like from being about the elections to being more about Frelimo's control, like in general. And I guess maybe we could also add, that Mondlane has been able to capitalize, right, on those grievances and mobilize the young population who are tired of being marginalized, of not being heard and of not having, prospects for a better future. And I tend to agree with some analysts that they say that the current crisis is bigger than Mondlane, now, and the elections, because, in fact, what we have is what we are observing now in Mozambique is, in fact, they've divorced kind of, between the population and the Mozambican state, which is ruled by Frelimo. To finish, because I think this is really important, is that something that happened last Friday, Friday in Pemba, the capital of Cabo Delgado in the north of the country, I think was very symbolic. The demonstrators, they knocked down, a statue of Alberto Shipandi, who is considered a national hero for, of course, his role in the liberation struggle. And they dragged, through the streets. So the reaction, of Frelimo, it's quite obvious, it's very clear.
Hmm. Now, what are the potential long-term implications of the current crisis for Mozambique's future? I mean, both domestically and in terms of its relations with neighboring countries and and international organizations.
Yeah, I would say that that's also a very tough question, in terms of, foreseeing the future. But let's just trying to think, what the current conditions are and the options that we have on the table. I would say maybe first, as I said again and again, the Constitutional Council has yet to validate the result, right? So no one really believes that it will, have the courage to ask for a recount or even call for new elections, right? Because this is what the opposition is asking for, but no one really believes that they will do that. So the most likely response probably will be, a reshuffle of the votes, to give the opposition a few more seats, so take a few seats from Frelimo and distribute them. But of course, the solution is very problematic, right? So because it raises the obvious questions that, we talked about, in the last 15 minutes about credibility, right? So how Frelimo will govern the country? So we don't know, we don't know. We still don't know. We will have to wait to see. Second, I would say, and this would be very dramatic, right? But it's that if the protests, that have already, showing signs more dramatic, by the day, if they continue, there is, of course, the possibility of the armed forces to intervene, right, and try to bring the situation under control. But again, this would be even more, dramatic. A third option, maybe, of course, and the better one, well, of course, I would say it's always the option of dialogue. But unfortunately, expectations in this regard are also very low, given what we have seen so far. So in November, after a long period of silence, finally, President Filipe Nyusi invited the four presidential candidates to a meeting. As a response, Mondlane, who had fled the country, allegedly in fear for his life, he accepted Nyusi's invitation to talk. But he called for more open and wider negotiations to include even the civil society. He also asked for more security measures to allow him to return to the country, etc. So it's like he made a list of demands. The meeting between the four candidates didn't take place, because Mondlane never returned the country. No new steps, towards dialogue have been taken so far. So again, the situation is still very, let's say, is still unknown. It's like it's very difficult to say what's going to happen. We have to wait, like in terms of the next developments of the next days. But just to maybe to conclude and to answer a little bit in terms of regional and international politics, neighboring countries, right? We had, for example, Zimbabwe and South Africa, like congratulated Frelimo, candidate Daniel Chapo, on his victory even before, right, the final results were announced. And a reversal in this sense does not seem likely, right? So I have already, I guess, like spoken about the UN statements, right? And its historical, let's say, lack of pressure for accountability. I also mentioned the EU's statement, that it's not taking sides. But in practice, what we see is that some actions, in fact, what we see are actions that could, in fact, be seen as taking sides. And what I mean by that is that almost 3 weeks ago, the European Council approved an additional package of 20 million euros to continue supporting the actions of the Rwandan Defense Force in the fight against insurgents in the province of Cabo Delgado. So, right, so indirectly, let's say they are still backing Frelimo, right? And in this context, as I said before as well, the protests are no longer, just blocking roads, but attacking Frelimo headquarters and government offices. More, this weekend or at the end of last week, so multinational companies have also been invaded, as people demand a share of the profits and better service. So the situation is very dramatic again. So in this sense, like, comparisons are even being made, right, with the war in Cabo Delgado, right? A war that has been, like the people are saying, that the war has spread, finally spread like across the country. So a war that has been going on for 7 years, right? So this is important also to remember. Frelimo still refuses, right, to accept that poverty and the taking of resources by the Frelimo elite are at the heart of this war. Instead, what they keep saying is that it's foreign destabilization, right? So again, the narrative of foreign destabilization, just as they recently accused foreign governments of financing the protests. So they,
It's a classic move of governments, especially in Africa.
And I don't know, like I just feel kind of like I'm like sorry, like to end, like say on such a depressing note, but this situation is indeed very urgent, and some intellectuals, like in Mozambique wrote over the weekend, I guess, denoting, right, this urgency. And they said, like the moment really, like it's very, very, demands urgency, demands action from the government, like otherwise, the national fabric is completely compromised, etc. And, like they say that, dialogue is, like the government, like have to have the courage to engage in dialogue, right? To build a better and not even a better a future together, right? So, but I don't know. Let's see. Let's hope that happens.
Yeah, I hope that calm and peace will come back in Mozambique. It's a country that has gone through a lot since the 60s, and this is the last thing that they need. Now, last question before we jump into the fun section. What do we know about Molane's whereabouts? Where is he right now?
We don't know. Let's say we don't know. Like there are conversations here and there that he was, like in South Africa. Then some people say that no, he's in Switzerland. But if I tell you, like he's here or there, I would be lying. his whereabouts are unknown, and
Okay.
yeah.
All right, let's switch to something less dramatic. Top three novels, top three dishes, and top three places you would like to visit. All right, we'll start with the novel. What are your top three novels? Or what are top three novels that you would suggest or advise anybody to read?
I I don't think I would advise because I haven't read them yet. You know, let's say that I'm taking seriously the bucket list. So they are, like they are on my reading list. So I haven't yet. So I haven't read yet. So I have a copy, like on my bedside table of The Mountains Sing. And I'm afraid I won't be able to tell her name, but she's a Vietnamese writer, Gwen Phan Kim Mai May. I don't know, like I'm sure I said completely wrong her name.
What's it? Can you repeat the title of the book?
Yes, The Mountains Sing.
How the Mountain Sings. Okay,
The Mountains Sing. Yeah. So,
cool.
uh,
That's one.
also, a book by a Brazilian writer. So maybe you heard about it. He's Itamar Vieira Jr., the writer, and the title is Torturado. So it's a novel email about sisters with kind of say modern enslavement in Brazil. So it seems very like interesting. And the latest one I would say it's from the I couldn't. Well, I had had a Mozambican here, so I would say that it's the latest novel by João Paulo Borges Coelho called Museu da Revolução, which the translation would be the Museum of Revolution.
The Museum of Revolution.
Yes, but I'm not sure that the title, that has been translated into English yet.
Okay. All right. Cool. Sounds. I mean, they sound like very exciting from the title. So hopefully, I will have the chance to read them and our listeners too. Now, top three dishes. Top three dishes that you cannot live without.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna be a disappointment here as well because like it's gonna sound very cheesy, because I think because I'm most of the year, like I'm far away from home. Let's say what home is Brazil. It's where I call home. So I really do miss my mom's food. So
I bet. I bet. Yeah. Moms make the best food.
yeah, so I said I was going to sound cheesy, but it's the truth. So I really, like I long to eat her food again.
But is there any like specific dishes that your mom makes that I know you love all of them, but are there three of those that you're like, oh my God, mom, if I land to Brazil today, these are the three things I want you to make for me.
Yeah, well, there is a special dish that, like people say that was invented, let's say in my town, my hometown, like it's called macarrão quadrado. So it's like a square pasta. So it's, the translation. So I think, like this is maybe the first dish I ever asked her to make
Okay.
when I
And where is your hometown? What's the name of your hometown?
well, it's called Monte Sião. It's in the Minas Gerais province or state. Yes, but it's a very tiny town. Like 20,000 thousand people. So
Okay. All right. Cool. And what's the second one that you would ask her?
I would say you cannot go to Brazil and not eat feijoada, right? So I think and
Mm-hmm.
her feijoada, it's a really good, and also I guess not exactly her dish, but the whole family, tradition and the gathering that we have when we also have a barbecue, right? A Brazilian churrasco. So I think this is also part of the list.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Exciting. Cool. All right. Now, the last question: top 3 places on your bucket list.
Oh gosh, this is that difficult as the other questions, because I love to travel. I love to travel, and I have seriously, I have so many places that I want to visit. That I just find very difficult to choose. Like if I had to choose only 3, because again, even in Brazil, like there's so many places that I have not been yet. But let's say, like if I had to name 3, I I would not even name like places in itself, but countries. Are we in Sweden, India, like India, South Korea, Thailand? Because the furthest east I have traveled is Turkey. So I think I'm very curious, to know more about, that side of the world that seem very far. It's,
So India, South Korea, Thailand.
yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I'm still planning an Asian food tour, right? A food tour that I really want to take to
The
Asia. And those countries are definitely on my list too. So I don't know when it's gonna happen, but it will happen, inshallah. So
I will gladly join you if I can.
that would be cool to try all those places and the cuisines and yeah.
Right.
Awesome, awesome. All right, well, Natalia, it was a pleasure to have you on the Africanist podcast, and thank you very much for your analysis on the current political situation in Mozambique. We hope that you will come back at some point, especially when your book is ready. The project sounds really interesting, and would love to have you back on the Africanist podcast.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure as well. It was great being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And on that note, I give you guys rendezvous for another episode of the Africanist podcast. In the meantime, stay safe and healthy.
Luttons pour la paix. Kon jamu Afrika mom lay ñaan. Mané jamu Afrika moy suñu natangue.